Okay, what we're going to talk about today is continuous improvement tools and how you might use those in clinical solutions or in your workplace, in the work that you're doing. I ran this session at the Florence Nightingale conference on Monday, but a condensed version sort of in 30 minutes. So we've got a little bit more time today to go through in more detail. Just in terms of housekeeping, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them. If we don't have time to answer them, I do get a copy of all the questions and then I can, I'll put together a document that answers everything that gets sent out with the slides and so on. So brief introduction, I'm Katrina Russell and I'm the Global Product Manager for Primary Care in Elsevier. Former role, which literally just sort of changed over this week, was the UK and Northern Europe Product Manager for our clinical solutions, so clinical key for nursing, clinical key for physicians, and our various pathology, radiology, laboratory reference and knowledge tools. Now, as a product manager at Elsevier, I have to juggle lots of big commercial and strategic pictures in terms of where do we want our products to go and how do we want our products to use, and also what do our customers expect and want to use from our products. But I have to juggle that with the minute detail of solving problems and solving problems for our users and our customers with the tools that we provide. And a very big part of that is looking at how we follow a continuous improvement cycle and process, and how we ensure that we're staying innovative and abreast of the changes that are happening in the various markets, and making sure that we deliver the best solutions to our customers. And that means I have a lot of big brain bubbles, I call them. So I have lots and lots of things to think about. Sometimes something will come to the front and I have to action it and solve problems very quickly. And sometimes they sort of bubble away at the side and you know, I consider them in the whole design thinking process and continuous improvement process that we support as product managers. So I'm hoping that today what I talk about is going to encourage you to embrace a similar kind of thinking in your work, and to have a think about how you can use tools and methods and processes out of different industries to support you in your work. As I said, this session's being recorded. We'll share the links afterwards and all the documentation. It's very important because I'm going to talk about a competition at the end, so all the links will be there available for you. And I'm very happy to be contacted at any time to answer any additional questions. My contact details are at the end. Finally, I've got about 20 years experience working in healthcare IT across primary care, acute care, clinical systems, and in the ambulance service. And I've worked on mainly healthcare IT solutions such as electronic patient records, and also clinical decision support tools and the content and algorithms required to support those clinical decision support tools. And I think I've mentioned it before when we've done Florence Nightingale webinars, that when I first started training IT systems back in the mid to late 90s, I started in primary care teaching GPs and nurses how to use computer systems for the first time. And now what we see when we're training is the sort of student nurses coming through, they're what we call digital natives. You know, they haven't ever had to be trained how to use a computer or a device. They may need training on the products, but they instinctively know how to use systems. But I come from the generation that had to learn everything. And the biggest takeaway I had then, on which I'm still really surprised follows through with me constantly, is in the GP practice, it was always the nurses that were the last people to be thought about in terms of training and support and the type of data they collected. But actually, it was really obvious that the nurses were probably the only ones at that time collecting really well-structured clinical information, because they were doing disease monitoring checks and asthma clinics, diabetes clinics, and so on. So at that time, that started to pique my interest in things like clinical data and clinical decision support, and how we could support standardized data collection, but not just collecting data to put it in a bucket, collecting data that we could actually use in our support of patient care and so on. So I wanted to bear that in mind while we go through. I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but I think that I'll ask you about asking questions, and this is something you need to bear in mind. Okay, so I've said about ask more questions and challenge the answers. As a product manager, you're always going to find me drawing people back to the question, what problem are we trying to solve? I think probably to the distraction of my colleagues at times. We often find ourselves looking at a tool or a solution that we already have and trying to work out how we can flex that to solve something else in our organisation, to do X or Y. But when you start looking at the X or Y first and looking at the problem and mapping that problem out in detail, we get a much better understanding of the subtle points that we sometimes miss. And that allows us to be really innovative in our approach and design. And quite often we actually find out once we've done all that mapping and done what journey does this user take to go from point A to point B, or really understanding what causes the problem in the first place, that the expensive solution that we thought we needed, or that everyone's sort of trying to come up with a solution first rather than understanding the problem. Sometimes that expensive solution is the least suitable, and we can actually achieve what we're going to do with something very simple. So moving on from that, I think if your parents, or if you cast your mind back to when we were younger, asking questions, but why? But why? Quite often we were told, because that's how it is, or because I said so, or because that's the way we do things. Okay, so that's fine in that scenario, but actually we need to ask questions to understand what problem we're trying to solve. And we also need to challenge those answers. So, typically the thing I get struck with most is, why do we do it like this? Or because that's how we've always done it. Well, that's not a valid answer. That might have been valid 10 years ago, but things have changed. And, if people are doing it because that's how we do it, and they haven't thought about the problem or the process and so on, those chances are that we've missed something really innovative, but actually really simple. And I mentioned data. Why are we taking hours to collect all this data? And we've heard it a lot, especially in the press and all these conferences to do with the pandemic and so on. Oh, because data saves lives. Well, you and I know that data doesn't save lives. The knowledge that we gain from the data and the picture that the data presents to us allows us to make decisions and changes and improvements which save lives. Just collecting the data, sticking it in a big bucket and doing nothing with it certainly doesn't save lives. So that's a challenge back, is to sort of say, well, why are we doing something? Are we getting the most benefit out of doing it? If not, we need to look at it and see why. So a great approach to this kind of thinking and problem solving, which leads to a really in-depth understanding of and a root cause analysis, is called the 5 whys. And that moves us from an approximate assumption of why we think something happens in the way it does, and actually really moves us to understanding the root cause. And it's a really great model to use prospectively. So when you're thinking about designing something, especially when you're trying to understand risk, clinical risk, or understand potential never events and so on in the hospital setting, it's really useful for that, because you can start to think of all the questions and the answers before they're asked. And I've actually seen it used retrospectively for analysis of never events as well. So it's a really useful tool. And I want you to think about these things is, if what I'm talking about here is, say, if I say a product or a solution, doesn't mean a computer product. A product is basically an outcome of a piece of work. It's the result of a piece of work. It might be an improved process. It might be a changed training plan, or it could be a computer system, a new care plan that you're collecting data into, and so on. So using the 5 whys approach, as I said, can be used for anything. It's really great for understanding the detail. Once you understand the 5 whys, you also have tools like the fishtail, which is very similar, but it goes down into more detail. So I'd urge you to have a look at and research some of those tools later. So I'm going to go through now and show you some points and ask you some questions. So we often hear this. You see it in the press. We ask ourselves, patients are delayed in the emergency department waiting to be moved to a ward. And so I could ask you some questions, here to think about why patients are delayed. You can throw loads of different options into the hat, but are they really the root cause of that delay, or are they all consequences of a process going wrong, or a person not understanding what to do next, and so on? So whilst you're thinking about that, I'm going to stick this up on the screen. Okay, so I'm sure in your heads, one of the points you thought about is, well, there's no beds available in the ward that we want to move the patient to. Okay, so that's one reason. You could have come up with lots and lots of different reasons, and so you can pick one and start with your first why. So my first why here is that there are no beds available. Okay, so why are there no beds available? Because patients are waiting to be discharged. They might be waiting for a porter. There could be a number of different reasons. So you can go down this. It's almost like an Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole to start going down through all these questions. So why are the patients waiting to be discharged? Because they're waiting for medications to come up from the pharmacy, or they're waiting for discharge information, or a number of other things. And so you can then start to ask in more detail, okay, so there's some processes here that are potentially delaying the discharge. So the prescription needs to be ordered and a letter needs to be printed before those items can be given to the patient and that patient being discharged. And so you might come down to the final why in this case. So the prescription hasn't been ordered and the letter hasn't been printed because a person hasn't initiated the process. So that's not to say that you always come down to the fact that it's a specific person's fault, because that's not what this is saying. But what this is saying is actually giving you a really in-depth view from quite a high-level reason right down to the next point. And then you can ask yourself, well, do we really need a brand new clinical system that costs an awful lot of money to solve this problem? Or actually, is this something where a process needs to be modified? Or more likely, is this somewhere where we even need support for that person who hasn't initiated the process because they're dealing with too many patients to be discharged and they've got a big backlog? Or is it a training issue? Is it something as simple as communication and training? So you can see why we've gone from there's no beds. So it's a very sort of high level statement, but we're moving down into this reasoning. So the next point then is to start looking at innovation. Now, innovation is the practical implementation of ideas that result in the introduction of improvement. So we've seen, again, using the COVID-19 example, that we've had to make rapid shifts in our ways of working. Some of those have led to adopting solutions and processes that have been available, but there hasn't really been a need to pick them up and use them aggressively. So the example here is like GPs doing face-to-face consultations, but over video conferencing rather than in the consultation room. These tools have been available for years. We've all been using, FaceTime, all sorts of different tools, but actually we're using them in different ways now because we've been forced to because of the working environment, poor our systems and our processes are, and the things that we really need to improve. So this leads us to sort of, for me to explain this slide, whereas innovation has a number of different drivers and a number of different reasons for change. So what I'm showing on the screen is a diamond shaped diagram with diamonds within it, and the cross running through the middle is where you look at items where you're sustaining change, where you're managing things as they go through, and you're looking at building on the systems and tools that we have and keeping them going, keeping them used and improving them bit by bit. But you also then have like disruptive change. So that's where the COVID-19 things comes in. Something comes in to disrupt what we're doing, and if we don't adapt and change quickly, we're going to get left behind. This information on the screen comes from a really interesting article I read that was about innovation and development and COVID-19 challenges and the opportunities and ways forward that provided. I really urge you to have a look at it. It's a very good way to think about how we can look at the future and have things in our back pocket without that large sort of disruption approach. And the link to that article is on this slide. And I'll just very quickly go through the four main points on here. Mission-driven innovation starts with that drive and ambition to achieve something or to achieve a goal, but you don't necessarily understand the specifics of how you're going to do it. So your mission might be, okay, I want to make sure that all expectant mothers that I see, you're reducing a risk factor for all expectant mothers, and it's your mission that you're going to eventually remove this risk altogether for your expectant mothers. So that's a mission-driven goal. It's very clear, this is what I want to do, but actually I need to do an awful lot of work to find out how I might do that. On the other hand, enhancement-oriented innovation often starts with the question of how can we do something better? And it's not necessarily about questioning what's being done. It's looking in detail about what how you're doing it and whether it can be done differently and better. So that's more about sustainable. We're not looking at rocking the boat and changing things, but we're just looking at how we can improve for the future. Then we look at adaptive innovation in the bottom triangle, and that looks at how might our situation demand changes in how we do X. So that looks at people realising that things are happening on the ground that don't fit with what's expected but could be beneficial. So as I said, the COVID-19 crisis has shown us where things have caused us real problems, but they've also shown us, oh, hang on, we've got this tool, this technology, this process that we can use here, and it'll be really good. So it's sort of expectations that we didn't realise could be helpful at the time. And then finally, anticipatory innovation is really about engaging and recognising uncertainty, and it's looking about what might be appropriate or possible in the future. It's having that long-term view, looking at what technology might allow us to do in a sort of short to medium term. So you may be looking at in 2 years' time, perhaps our artificial intelligence will have improved so much that we can use it to really predict these changes in models much more. But as I said, I'm going to these links will be in the slides for you to go and read that in more detail. One thing I want to call out here, which is a really good example of anticipatory change and adaptive innovation, is the project for the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health that they did on digital growth charts. And that's really, really interesting how, most primary care systems might have digital growth charts, but basically what they are is a piece of paper on the computer screen that you click on to show where the growth chart is. It doesn't give you then any data, it doesn't help you calculate anything and so on. But this project at the Royal College actually uses the data and actually allows you to collect the data and does all the calculations. So it's a really, really interesting project of how you take flat electronic content to be really active and advanced clinical decision support tools. Okay. So now we're going to talk about continuous improvement. I touched this a little bit when we were talking about innovation, because innovation and improvement come hand in hand. And what we need to do here is think about what else supports innovation or what forms the thinking processes that lead to innovation. So continuous innovation is the ongoing improvement of products or services or processes or the way that you work with people. So remember I said it's not necessarily about a computer system at the end of the day. You can use this in any approach. And most of these models, interestingly enough, came out of manufacturing, a lot from car manufacturing, of how they moved from having an awful lot of waste and variability in their processes to making things become as streamlined and as predictable as possible. And this came along through processes of continual cycle of looking at the problem, solving the next thing, looking at the problem again, solving and solving until you've pretty much reduced all the variability and designed as much risk out as possible. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Kaizen. Some people actually even refer to this as a philosophy as well as a sort of manufacturing and now process that is now also used in a lot of computer and solution designs, as well as process improvement and things like hospitals and healthcare systems where you need to do a big sort of review of processes and make those improvements. Other methods that you might hear talked about is Six Sigma, Lean, Agile, and many more. But they all tend to work on the principle that you need to identify a problem, identify the type of people that you want to help you solve that problem, and then start analysing it and looking at solutions and testing those solutions and measuring if those solutions are actually making a change, because that's a really important point. You have to be able to measure what you're doing. If you can't measure it and understand what's happening, you can't manage it, you can't make those changes going forward. Now, you'll probably have heard of also things like Waterfall and Agile, and this is sort of two different approaches to projects or improvement programs and so on. And you will actually probably hear now, especially, oh, we're not doing it Waterfall, it's really old fashioned, we're going to be Agile about this. And that sometimes makes me a bit cross because, especially in the technology space, people will go, oh, Agile, oh, yeah, it's the buzzword, that's what we're doing. But actually, Waterfall is really useful still in projects that have an absolutely tight, fixed scope and you know nothing is going to change, because it really helps you look at, in order to deliver this by a certain date, I need X number of people or X amount of money or X amount of tools. You know, it's really, really clear then that you know exactly what you need, you know when you're going to need it, and you know when you're going to deliver it by. That's fantastic for a program such as, well, let's say, for example, it's now law for all of the blue flashing lights on the ambulance to be pink, and we have to replace them by a certain date. You know, the scope of that very basic example is very unlikely to change, you know, and we know we've got X thousand ambulances, therefore we need X thousand pink lights, and because it's the law, it has to be done by this time. That time frame can't be shifted. So in order to make all of these changes to all of these ambulances, I need, you know, 1 million light bulbs and 200 engineers to go around and do it. So you can be very clear in what you need to do, which means you can be very clear in asking your organisation for the resources needed to do that. Okay, so think back to the example I did about the child growth charts and the you know, the calculators and the information needed behind that to make that project happen. That's very likely to require you to continually go back to the problem you're trying to solve, continually test your ideas, improve the process that you're trying to deliver, and constantly go around that loop to make sure that you're not missing something. That's where Agile is really, really important, because at the time of you starting your idea or thinking about your idea, you don't know how you're going to solve the problem. You don't know what resources you're going to need to solve the problem. And you also don't know how long it's going to take you to get to that outcome. So that's where the Agile process really comes in handy, because you can see on the diagram, you've got a number of like full circles and the arrows going from left to right along the bottom, but you've got cycles of iteration continually. Now in software development where I'm working, we do 2-week cycles. We do what we call 2-week sprints, and we iterate continually around those 2 weeks. This is also really helpful to when you're thinking also about things like clinical changes. You know, if you're looking down, working on a project and not looking up at the horizon on a regular basis, it's a bit like being on a ship and steering the wrong direction. What happens if the market changes? What happens if those calculations changes and you aren't continually looking at those and you're just taking the data that you had from that very first point? You know, even if a boat goes a few meters off course at the start, if they stay on going a few meters off course at the start, by the time they get to where they're going, they could be 300-400 miles off course. So your project can very quickly go off course if you're not continually looking up at the horizon, checking if where you're going is still where you should be going. And if you should be correcting your course, you can correct it very quickly and easy with minimal waste, minimal disruption and minimal change. But also this Agile process allows you to look up and go, should we still be doing this? Because that's the most important thing. You know, there's nothing wrong with going through a few design iterations of continuous improvement and realizing actually we don't need to do this because something else is happening somewhere else in the organization that we can use this, we can do. You know, it's that going back to that 5 whys. Do we really need to solve this with a big sort of big bang approach? So if you're not being agile, not continually improving, not continually looking up at your final destination, checking if that's where you still be going, you are introducing variability and waste and poor process and poor time management into your work. So being agile allows you to constantly do those checks and balances. Okay, so moving on then to design thinking. This is almost like the third point of the slides I've been going through. You need to have lots of questions, lots of problems that you're trying to solve. You need to continually look at how you improve things, because sometimes, as I said, you don't need to build something new. You can improve what you've got. And then you need to change your mindset of thinking into design thinking. I'm going to provide quite a few different links for this because there's some really interesting psychology and design thinking, as well as really, really useful examples in the links that I send to you. And things like journey mapping and prototyping and so on will help you get your head around design thinking. But really, it boils down to three things. Is what I'm doing desirable? Is it feasible? And is it viable? I'm going to frame this in terms of clinical solutions I work in, but this shouldn't be pinned to a piece of software or a clinical solution. You can think about this in almost everything you do when you're looking at change or improvement and innovation. What I'm doing, does it make sense to people, and does it make sense for people to use? Okay, if you can answer that, you're basically answering the question about whether what you're doing is desirable. And if what we're doing is likely to become part of a sustainable business model, can it be picked up and used easily? Is it something that we can produce without requiring millions of dollars for, a very, very small return? And I'm not just talking about profit, I'm talking about, say, return on investment in terms of reduced costs or improved workflow or getting more people from the ED to the ward and discharged more quickly. Does it become sustainable and viable? And also the final one is feasibility. What is technically possible in the foreseeable future? I might want to review all the data coming in through those growth charts and use great big AI supercomputer systems to process all that data and to give me some logic answers about what we can see the trends are happening in the growth charts and how we can make changes. It's a bit of a rough example, but you can see where I'm going. But if I need supercomputers in a huge data center that costs me millions of dollars a year to run and lots and lots of technical people and clinical informaticians and so on to help me understand all that data, is it really technical possible for me or my organisation or the project I'm working on and so on? Yes, if you've got a huge budget and this is going to change healthcare for children forever and be groundbreaking, but is it for a small project that I'm running in my primary care sort of service or in this maternity unit and so on? Well, probably not. So if that's not feasible, we then start working backwards from there again. We start looking around our 5 whys and our continual improvement process to say, okay, if that's not what's feasible, what is? And eventually you'll come to this middle point of the Venn diagram that's almost like your sweet spot, where that intersection of desirability, viability and feasibility cuts over is where you want to be. And as I keep saying, that's not necessarily the big bang multi-million-dollar project. That could be something as simple as just changing some of the questions in your care plan of how you collect that data or how you share that data with other people. Design thinking helps you frame a question, and then it can help your team or the people that you're speaking to, for customers and so on, to think about who you're designing for and what they actually need. Because we can make the mistake of thinking that people need this and it will change things forever. And we build it and then we show it to people and we don't get a particularly good response and we get lots of negative feedback. Well, that's because we haven't framed our question and gone out and gathered inspiration from people right at day one. We shouldn't be waiting to the end of the project. We should be doing this before we even start the project. And that helps us gather our inspiration and we're going out into the world and observing people and discovering what they really need. We are asking them, what problem do we need to solve for you? And then we can think about how we might solve it. And that ideas, so it helps us push past the obvious and come up with really fresh solutions to the problem. Again, I'm going back to 5 whys. We don't necessarily need these big systems, but we do need to make sure that what we've thought about has pushed past the obvious and has really given us something to think about. We need to make our ideas tangible. So you'll hear lots of software people, especially, talking about prototypes. It's great if you've got a team of designers that can sit there in front of a computer screen for you and design something on screen that you can go and put in people's hands. It's not feasible. None of us have those resources available to us. I even struggle to have those resources in my line of work, and I work in clinical solutions. A prototype is as good as a notepad and pen or a whiteboard or a big flip chart with you drawing on it. And then with those drawings, getting somebody to take a different colour pen and change them for you. Or if I was using it, I would do this first. If I was using that button would annoy me there. That's really good prototyping, because it allows you to rapidly push past the obvious and make those changes. And when you've got an idea of those rough prototypes and what is working and what isn't, you can then test those prototypes and gather more feedback and iterate. And if you remember what I've just talked about, that's agile. That's going, okay, we start off with an idea. Does this work? No, we've had some feedback. It doesn't. Let's go back and redraw it. Let's have a look again. And we're going to take it back to those people who gave the feedback and say, well, does it make sense for you now? Does it work in a better way for you now? And that is really the agile, iterative approach. Now, once you've done all of that work, you really need to share the story of what you're doing, because once you've arrived at the right solution, you need to craft and share that story to introduce it to your colleagues and clients, customers. Most likely, in your case, it might be to the senior leadership of your trust, that this is something I think we can do to solve this problem, and I would like support in order to do it. So you need to really sell the story. It's that elevator pitch of what makes somebody sit up and look and go, yes, I'm going to support further discovery for this piece of work. And one of the ways of doing that is a tool called the PRFAQ. So it's the press release and frequently asked questions. And that's really inspired by the working backwards approach that's been made popular by companies such as Amazon. Now, regardless of what you think about sort of companies like Amazon, the way they handle product development and innovation is really, really interesting. And they use product vision, mission, and PRFAQs to give themselves a mindset of what is happening 5 years in the future. So what they do is, before they could get funding for any of their proposals that they've come about for all of these different things I've spoken about today, they write a press release based on the product is launched, it's been really successful with 5 years in the future, you know, everything's done, and here we go, here's the big press release launch. And they write it as if they're presenting their information to journalists and the market and so on. And then at the end of the press release, they have a frequently asked questions section that really gives in-depth answers that somebody who's never seen it or might want to write about what you're doing, it gives them all the answers. So it's almost telling you that we do this is how it works, this is what it saves people in time, this is what it brings in benefit, and so on. So what you're doing is setting yourself to say, this is the end goal, and I'm going to work backwards from there to work out everything I need to do to get to where I'm going. I want you to bear that in mind, because the competition I'm going to talk about at the end will ask you to present a PR FAQ. And the links I'll share with the slides, as I said, will provide you lots of examples to look at those kind of documents. So I've been giving you lots of theory. I'm just keeping an eye on the time, but what does that look like in real life? I'm going to go through a step-by-step conversation of something that really happened between me and two other colleagues in Elsevier when we were talking about clinical key for nursing and how we could improve it for the UK and Northern Europe market. So I would regularly meet up with these two colleagues when we were in London and have a coffee. And the conversation went something around the lines about us talking about how nurses, allied health professionals and so on take much more responsibility now for care planning and treatment decisions. And that reduces burden overall on clinicians and overstretched services, but it actually builds demand, and change is in the way that we learn and work together to develop those advanced skills to specialise in those areas. And we noticed that bit, or say we, you know, that was obvious that was happening much more in some of our UK regions than it was, say, perhaps in our US organisations. So my colleague said to me, well, that's great, because we've got CK Nursing, and that's the platform which helps support all these knowledge and the needs of the users to get to the information they need for that. But from my perspective as a product manager, not many organisations wanted to buy CK Nursing in the UK. I was always told, oh, you know, it's not a case of don't waste your time on it, but there isn't really a market for it here in the UK. So then you have to challenge that. Why? You know, we're going back to the first slide, but why? Why don't people want to use it? Why can't we sell it? Why did the sales team focus on CK Physician rather than CK Nursing? So that sort of goes back to where my first slides were about asking all these questions. So the first point we came to, okay, well, it's true, the majority of the content on CK Nursing at the time of this conversation was US specific. Not to say it's not useful at all in the UK, but some of it was so US focused that really the interest isn't there to look at it. So we concluded then, which is our problem statement, the problem we needed to solve, that our content in CK nursing doesn't reflect the shift that we were talking about earlier, especially for the UK and European market, and it doesn't support that multiple different nursing, midwife and AHP roles to work together, or support that additional need for care planning and clinical decision making and so on. So then we thought of, well, how might we solve that problem? Okay, well, we know that we've got appropriate content to support the AHP and interdisciplinary roles, because the people I was talking to, Poppy and Robert, they had a huge backlist. They had all the books. They've got all of the books and all the materials there. And also they were working on the commissioning strategies for developing new content that's appropriate for inclusion on the platform. And just as an aside, they're working with people actually from the Florence Nightingale Foundation to write leadership books, which will be included in the CK Nursing platform, because that's really what's important in some of these bigger questions about how do we get these teams to lead and work together and so on. So this leads to the point that we're going to have to draw up a lean canvas, and we need to present our idea to the senior leadership team to get the support and buy-in for us to do the additional steps of work to start looking at how we solve this problem. So that leads me on to the lean canvas. What I wanted to do was to show you the specific lean canvas that we presented to the board for this case. I've been asked not to show it because there's some clinically, commercially sensitive information in there, but I have been able to pick out some bits that we can share. Basically, the lean canvas allows you to frame the problem that you want to solve in a very succinct one page. It removes the need at the start of something to come up with a huge business case with very detailed cost and financial structures and breakdowns and so on, which are really, really difficult to pin down unless, if you remember the ambulance example, unless you're doing a very, very tightly controlled fixed scope project. It's very easy to cost that out and come up with all that information. It's not easy to come up with everything you might need to do these clinical calculations behind growth charts. So a lean canvas works really well on something where you need to solve a problem, but you're not yet sure how to do it. Let me just show you some of the points that we actually took into our lean canvas. So our unique value proposition was that we're the market leader for these various AHP type books. Almost all students that have studied in the UK have used our content because we're the only people that really do this work in this area. And we've also got some market leading journals as well. So that's our unique value proposition, and it talks about our unfair advantage because competing publishers, they simply don't publish a book list to do with allied health professionals, and we do. So really, if you think from a commercial perspective, you can only get this content from us, so we may as well use it in our other platforms and tools to enhance the value of those platforms. When you're working on lean canvases, there's nothing wrong with finding a really, really good one that's had funding and had a lot of buzz about it and copying it. It's not about plagiarizing. It's taking the best example you can find and using that example to base your work on, because what you'll do then is you'll improve your work. And also you must always, always, always ask people to critique your work and basically give you a grilling. The more people critique what you're doing and going through your information, the better your proposals will become, the better your presentations will become to sell the idea to people and what you want to use it for. And even if you don't get immediate buy-in when you present your lean canvas to your board, you don't necessarily get an immediate buy-in to fund a 5-year project. What you might do is pique that interest enough to say, okay, we don't know if we can do this big bang approach, but we can give you funding to do a discovery phase, or we can give you the resources you need to do a discovery phase to actually get a bit better at understanding what the scope of the project might be, or what the costs might be, or what the benefits might be. And I'm actually working on something like that right now where we've been told, yes, we think this is going to be really useful for us to look at, but we want you to do some discovery first. So we were able to take one of the problems we want to solve and focus on that first to see then if it goes any further. Okay, I appreciate this is lots and lots of talking. As you can see, it's very detailed. Hopefully it's piquing everybody's interest. I'm just going to grab a sip of water. My final slide is to talk to you about the Florence Innovation Lab. This is a competition that I've wanted to put in place for a while, and we're really pleased actually to make it available to the Florence Nightingale Scholars. And what we're hoping to do is asking you guys to prepare a lean canvas and a PR FAQ to describe a problem and how you want to solve it using new or existing digital solutions. Now, it doesn't have to be a problem with a computer system. It's a problem that you have faced or that you are thinking about in your work. And I want you to look at how you might use design thinking, innovation, and the various tools here to help you solve that problem. What we'll do out of all of the submitted items, 5 of the best will be selected to receive group coaching and an individual coaching sessions with people from inside Elsevier who are industry experts and leaders in this area. People such as Tim Hawkins, who's our Managing Director for Clinical Solutions, Jen Kano, who's based out in the US. She's the head of our clinical product management, so very, very technically knowledgeable and skilled in pulling these ideas out and asking you more detailed questions about how to solve them and so on. I'll be involved in the panels as well and various other people. So it will actually give you real opportunity to improve and be grilled to improve your information so you can go and present it to your board or present it to the people who are going to help you go forward and try and solve that. So as I said, I'll share the slides. There's lots of links to additional information, resources, templates that you can use, videos that you can watch and so on. And also links to our landing page to give you access to various different webinars we've done in the past that you can go and have a look at. The closing date is 12th of November. Nobody from Elsevier can enter, and it's open to Florence Nightingale Scholars from 2019 and 2020 and 21. So the people who have either just graduated, as it were, in a conference, or people who are currently on scholarships at the moment. So please have a think about joining and entering the competition. I'm very happy to answer questions and to give you some more pointers on that if needed. My email address and contact details are on the screen, but we will pass them around with the slides afterwards. On the landing page, sorry, I'll go back a slide. On this page here, which you'll get the link at when I share the slides, the email address for entry is on there. So it's not my email address you enter to, it's a specific email that we've put on the screen for you. Okay, so I'm going to have a look now at the Q&A box to see if there's any questions. Okay, so there's nothing come through, so I've either done a really good job or you're all sleeping. So let me just give it a moment to see if any questions come in. And while we're waiting for that, I'll repeat some of the questions that were asked of me during the live presentations at the conference. As somebody asked, can we do this to look at a clinical problem? Absolutely. These methods that I've been talking to you about should be used to help you think about solving problems differently, regardless of what that problem is. So, have a think about how it can be used in different ways. I coach and mentor some interns recently who are coming into the world of work, and we looked at using these tools for actually how to increase the number of interviews you're getting, because obviously you can have a great CV, but if you can't get in front of people, it's difficult to get into roles. So we use some of those problem solving and the 5 whys approaches to look at how they might improve their chances for interviews and so on. So you can see that it's not just framed in a computer product kind of approach. So let me just check. So CK Nursing, there was a question, what is CK Nursing? So Clinical Key for Nursing is our platform. So it's a product that we provide that provides a great deal of clinical knowledge, information at the point of care, and deep reference research information specifically aimed at nurses. So as well as having a great number of books and journals available, we have lots of drug information, monographs, patient education leaflets that can be customised and printed out in multiple different languages for patients. Clinical overviews, so really in-depth but very easy to navigate sets of information that help you at the point of care when you need to perhaps understand a bit more about a patient's condition or prepare for ward rounds, and your interdisciplinary team type approaches. Also, large number of procedure videos, multimedia, so you can have a look at images and pictures to help you with your clinical work. And the way that the search engine is developed within clinical key for nursing is it presents information that's most clinically relevant to your search terms. So, for example, in Google, you can type in atrial fibrillation. You'll get millions of results. How many of them are clinically relevant or evidence-based or factually correct? Who knows? But the information in clinical key is all of that, and the search algorithms show you clinical relevance. So the most useful information appears sort of further up in the searches. If you would like to know more about that, I will provide some of the links in our share out of the slides, so you can go and have a look at some previous webinars that we've done where we've actually demonstrated clinical key for nursing and how it's used in the workplace. And we'd be very happy to arrange further discussions, if you wanted to. So hopefully that answers that question. Let me just check if there's anything else. Okay, that's really good question. Thanks, Monica. Can we use Canvas for services improvement as well? Absolutely. As I said, yes, they actually really help to frame what you're trying to do, because things like service improvement is huge, isn't it? Where do you start with that? What I'd suggest is you'd use some of the design thinking videos to help you split down what you're trying to improve in the services into a number of smaller problems. Don't try and tackle it all in one big bang, because you'll find as you go through and start breaking things down that there's lots of smaller things that you need to solve. And as I said, some of them are just processes, some of them are training and personnel and skills, and some of them are the tools in which you need to use to do the job. And then you can actually use canvases for those various points. Now, there are loads of different types of canvases as well. I've shown you a lean canvas, but there's lots of others that you can use. And if you follow the links to IDEO that I'm going to share with this, you can see lots of different examples on that, specifically around design thinking. And that will really help you when you're looking at service improvement. And that's a brilliant question. So thank you for raising that. Okay, let's see if anything else has come through. Okay. How can we link a canvas with research projects? Okay, so I think it's really about presenting how you might solve the problem and what the benefits you are going to have you're going to use for solving that problem, and so on. Let me just go back on my slides. Okay, it might be a bit difficult to see on the screen, but if you use the canvas to so research, in research you have a hypothesis, don't you? So what your hypothesis is that you believe that X, Y, and Z, but that's a problem that you're trying to solve, but just framed in a different way. So what's your hypothesis? So use your problem statement here as your hypothesis. And what are the existing alternatives? So, how do we deal with that now? So when you're trying to research something, what do we do at the moment? Do we do anything? Okay, so if no, say there aren't any existing alternatives, but if there are, list out how we deal with that at the moment. And then your solution is how we think of what our research we're going to do is we think that by doing X and treating in this way, or this treatment or this intervention or this therapy, this is going to solve it. And you need to really have your key metrics, which is the data that you want to understand of how you're going to measure your success. So if you're doing research, what is the pass rate, the fail rate? What do you want to measure? So you just need to think about taking these terms, which are quite business centric, and to think about what does that relate to in terms of my research terms, if it's clinical research or, education research and so on. But yes, and I'm sure actually with some good Googling, we can find some examples for that, and I'll make a note to look at that and provide some examples. Okay. Is there anything else? I'm just aware of the time. We've got 2 questions, so I've answered that. Hopefully that one's been done. And Okay, so this is a good question. What's the best tool we can use in reviewing the blueprint of a new service before kickoff, i.e. starting a pre-operative assessment service? I would, if you're talking about the tool itself, you talk about so the process in reviewing. There's the really good video from the design thinking and patient journeys that's included in these slides. Is a really good way for you to go and review what you might be using or the process that you think you're putting in place, because it helps you really break things down with post-it notes on the wall. It's a very analog tool. You know, it's basically sit around the room, write down all the patient journeys, use different coloured post-it notes to flag different things, and then you can start to plot a line or a journey through it to see if you've got the best, most efficient process. And that's the same for things like services. A service is a journey, isn't it? There's a start and end point. There's things you have to do along that journey to provide that service. So that's a really good tool, I think, that would help you look at it very differently and very quickly make you think, that's in the wrong place. But you can move a post-it note to the right place and see if that journey still makes sense. But if you've built a great big computer system, it's a bit late then, because you've got to go back and recode everything. So start those assessment services, design them on post-it notes, stick them on the boards, move them around, and so on. Okay, right, we're at the top of the hour. I'm going to finish now. Thank you so much for joining and watching and bearing with me and through the technical issues. I will make sure that all of the slides are sent around, useful links and so on. If you have any questions, as I said, I'm very happy to be contacted, as are my colleagues. So bring your questions to me. If I can't answer them, I'll send them on to the people who can. And yeah, watch this space. I really hope you can join the competition as well. It'd be great to see how we can help you and look at your amazing ideas and see how we can support you in your foundation and the work that you're doing. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.